The desert wind howled across the mountainous terrain of Afghanistan as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her scope for the third time. Through the crosshairs, she could see three figures moving confidently across an open courtyard. 1,847 meters away, nearly a mile of empty air between her rifle and the targets that had eluded capture for over 2 years. "Rodriguez, you seeing what I'm seeing?" whispered Lieutenant Commander Jake Mitchell, the SEAL team leader lying beside her on the rocky outcrop. His voice carried the weight of disbelief as he peered through his binoculars at the same scene. "Roger that, sir. 3 high-value targets, all in one location," Maria replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She had been tracking these enemy generals for months, and now fate had delivered them all together in one impossible moment. The wind picked up again, and Jake shook his head. "That's an impossible shot, Rodriguez. The wind speed alone, and at that distance, no one can make that shot. We need to call for air support and wait for a better opportunity." Maria's finger found the trigger guard as she calculated wind speed, bullet drop, and the movement patterns of the targets below. She had spent countless hours perfecting her craft, but this moment would define everything she had worked for. 3 of the most wanted enemy commanders in the region stood unknowingly in her crosshairs, and she had perhaps 30 seconds before they disappeared back into the labyrinth of caves and tunnels they called home. "Sir," she said quietly, her eye never leaving the scope, "with all due respect, I can make this shot." What happened next would become legend among Special Operations Forces, a story whispered in briefing rooms and training facilities around the world. It was a moment when skill, determination, and pure instinct converged to change the course of a mission that had cost too many lives and consumed too many resources. But before that trigger was pulled, before Maria Rodriguez became the sniper who redefined what was possible, her journey began in the most unlikely of places, a small farming town in Texas where dreams of military service seemed as distant as the mountains she would one day call her battlefield. Maria Elena Rodriguez grew up in the dusty streets of Laredo, Texas, where the biggest excitement usually came from high school football games and the occasional border patrol chase. Her father, Carlos, worked double shifts at the local auto repair shop, his hands permanently stained black from engine oil and honest work. Her mother, Isabella, cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the north side of town, leaving before dawn and returning after dark with stories of pristine kitchens and children who had everything Maria could only dream of. The Rodriguez family lived in a small 2-bedroom house with peeling paint and a screen door that never quite closed properly. Money was tight, but love was abundant. Every evening, the family gathered around their warm kitchen table for dinner, sharing stories from their day and dreaming of better tomorrows. Maria's younger brother Diego talked endlessly about becoming a professional soccer player, while her older sister Carmen planned to attend community college and become a nurse. But Maria's dreams were different. While her classmates talked about prom dates and college applications, she found herself drawn to the military documentaries that played late at night on the History Channel. She watched in fascination as soldiers moved through foreign landscapes with precision and purpose, their equipment gleaming and their faces serious with the weight of their responsibilities. The spark that would change everything came during her junior year of high school. A Marine Corps recruiter visited Laredo High School for Career Day, setting up a booth between the community college representative and the local bank manager. Staff Sergeant David Chen stood ramrod straight in his dress blues, his chest decorated with ribbons that told stories of service in distant lands. When Maria approached his table, he looked her straight in the eyes with a respect she had rarely experienced from adults. "You interested in serving your country, young lady?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen both the best and worst of humanity.
"Yes, sir,"
Maria replied, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "I want to make a difference." Staff Sergeant Chen smiled and handed her a pamphlet filled with images of Marines in action. "The Corps isn't easy, but it'll make you into someone you never knew you could become. You got what it takes?" That question haunted Maria for weeks. Did she have what it takes? She had never considered herself particularly strong or brave. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed barely 125 pounds, and had never been in a fight in her life. But something deep inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had been waiting her whole life for someone to ask her that question. The conversation at home that evening was explosive. Carlos slammed his fist on the table so hard the salt shaker jumped. "Absolutely not. I didn't work myself to death raising a daughter just to watch her throw her life away in some foreign war." Isabella tried to play peacemaker, but her worry was evident in every line of her face. "Mija, there are other ways to serve. You could be a teacher. or work for the government here at home. Why do you want to put yourself in danger? But Maria had made up her mind. For the first time in her life, she had found something that felt like her true calling. Over the following months, she threw herself into physical training, waking up at 5 in the morning to run the empty streets of Laredo. She did push-ups and sit-ups until her muscles screamed, and she studied military history with the dedication of a scholar. Her transformation didn't go unnoticed. Her best friend Sarah watched in amazement as Maria's body became lean and strong. "You're becoming a completely different person," she said one afternoon as they walked home from school. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Maria replied. And she meant it. The girl who had once been content to drift through life was discovering reserves of determination she never knew existed. The day she turned 18, Maria walked into the Marine Corps recruitment office in downtown Laredo. Staff Sergeant Chen was waiting for her, as if he had known this day would come. The paperwork took hours, but with each signature, Maria felt herself stepping closer to the person she was meant to become. Boot camp at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island, was everything the recruiters said it would be, and worse. The South Carolina heat was oppressive, the drill instructors were relentless, and the physical demands pushed Maria to her absolute limits. She learned to strip and clean her rifle blindfolded, to navigate obstacle courses in the dark, and to push through exhaustion that felt like drowning. But it was during marksmanship training that Maria discovered her true gift. While other recruits struggled to hit targets at 200 yards, Maria consistently placed shots in tight groupings at distances that made her instructors take notice. Gunnery Sergeant Williams, a Vietnam veteran with 30 years of experience, pulled her aside after a particularly impressive day at the range. "Rodriguez, you've got natural talent with that rifle. Have you ever considered sniper school?" Maria had heard whispers about sniper training, the elite marksman who could engage targets at incredible distances, often operating alone behind enemy lines. It sounded both terrifying and exactly like the challenge she craved. What would that involve, Gunnery Sergeant? The hardest training the Corps has to offer. Most people wash out, but if you make it through, you'll be one of the most lethal weapons in the Marine arsenal. You interested? That night, Maria lay in her narrow bunk listening to the sounds of her fellow recruits sleeping. Outside, the sounds of Paris Island continued, distant shouting from night training exercises, the hum of vehicles moving equipment, the eternal rhythm of military life that never truly stopped. She thought about her family back in Laredo, probably gathered around the kitchen table wondering if their daughter was safe. She thought about the path that had led her here, from a small border town to one of the most challenging military training facilities in the world. And she thought about the opportunity Gunnery Sergeant Williams had placed before her, a chance to become something extraordinary. 3 months later, Maria graduated from boot camp in the top 10% of her class. Her parents and siblings made the long drive from Texas to watch her receive her eagle, globe, and anchor, the symbol that marked her transformation from civilian to Marine. Carlos wiped tears from his eyes as he watched his daughter march in formation, her back straight and her eyes focused on some distant horizon that only she could see. "I'm proud of you, Mija," he whispered during their brief time together after the ceremony. "I don't understand why you chose this life, but I can see it's made you happy." Isabella hugged her daughter tightly, memorizing the feel of her embrace. "Promise me you'll be careful, whatever they have you do next." Maria promised, but deep down she knew that the path she had chosen would never be truly safe. The next phase of her journey would take her to sniper school, where the real test of her abilities would begin. She had proven she could survive boot camp, but sniper training would push her beyond anything she had experienced. As her family drove away from Paris Island, Maria stood watching their car disappear into the distance. She was no longer the uncertain teenage girl from Laredo who had dreamed of something bigger than her small-town life. She was a United States Marine, and her real adventure was just beginning. The bus that would take her to her next assignment waited in the distance, its engine running and its destination unknown. But Maria wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. The girl who had grown up in the shadow of the border was ready to step into the light of her true calling. One carefully aimed shot at a time. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, Virginia, was unlike anything Maria had experienced during boot camp. Where Paris Island had been about breaking down civilians and rebuilding them as Marines, Sniper School was about finding the handful of Marines who possessed the unique combination of patience, precision, and mental fortitude required to be a lone wolf on the battlefield. Master Gunnery Sergeant Robert Hayes stood before the 43 Marines who had been selected for the course, his weathered face showing the lines of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of long-distance warfare. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of absolute authority as he outlined what the next several months would demand. "Look around you," he said, his eyes scanning the group of eager faces. 1-0, Mrs. Abu. Statistically speaking, fewer than half of you will graduate from this program. This isn't because we enjoy watching Marines fail. It's because the job you're training for doesn't offer second chances. In combat, a sniper's first shot is often their last opportunity to complete the mission and return home alive. The first weeks of training were a brutal introduction to the physical and mental demands of sniper work. Maria learned to remain motionless for hours at a time, fighting off muscle cramps and the maddening urge to shift position. The instructors had developed exercises that would have seemed like torture in any other context, lying prone in the Virginia mud, while instructors walked inches from hidden students, searching for any sign of movement or improper camouflage. During one particularly challenging exercise, Maria spent 14 hours concealed in a patch of tall grass, watching a target building through her scope, while instructors actively hunted for her position. A fellow student, Corporal Jake Morrison from Ohio, was discovered and eliminated from the exercise when an instructor spotted the reflection from his scope at hour 6. Maria learned to trust her instincts and accept discomfort as a temporary companion rather than an enemy to be fought. The marksmanship training pushed Maria's natural abilities to new levels. Where boot camp had focused on hitting targets at relatively close range, sniper school demanded precision at distances that seemed impossible. Maria learned about wind reading, studying the movement of grass and leaves to calculate the invisible forces that could push a bullet inches off target across a 1,000-yard shot. Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Williams, one of the few female instructors at the school, took a special interest in Maria's development. During a particularly difficult week when Maria struggled with advanced ballistics calculations, Williams pulled her aside for additional training. "Rodriguez, you've got the natural shooting ability that can't be taught," she said as they worked through wind estimation problems in the classroom. "But being a sniper isn't just about pulling the trigger. You need to become a student of everything: weather, terrain, human behavior, technology. The Marines who excel in this field are the ones who never stop learning." Williams had earned her place at the school through years of deployment and combat experience, including 2 tours in Iraq where she had accumulated over 50 confirmed kills. Her guidance became invaluable as Maria learned to think like a predator rather than simply a marksman. The psychological training proved just as challenging as the physical demands. Maria learned to control her breathing and heart rate under extreme stress, to make life or death decisions in seconds, and to live with the weight of taking human lives in service of her mission. The instructors brought in military psychologists who helped students understand the mental challenges they would face in combat situations. "The sniper's greatest weapon isn't their rifle," explained Dr. Sarah Chen during one of her lectures. "It's their ability to remain calm and focused when everything around them is chaos. You'll often be operating alone, far from support, making decisions that affect not just your own survival, but the success of entire operations." As the weeks passed, the original group of 43 students gradually diminished. Some washed out due to physical limitations, others couldn't handle the mental pressure, and a few simply realized that the sniper lifestyle wasn't what they wanted from their military career. Maria watched friends and training partners leave the program, each departure serving as a reminder of how difficult the path she had chosen truly was. The field exercises became increasingly complex, simulating real combat scenarios where students had to locate, identify, and engage multiple targets, while avoiding detection by opposing forces played by instructors. During one memorable exercise, Maria spent 3 days moving through the Virginia woods, living off minimal rations and water, while tracking a high-value target through changing weather conditions. On the 3rd day, exhausted and running low on supplies, Maria finally had a clear shot at her target, an instructor positioned 1,200 yards away in a camouflaged position that had taken her hours to locate. As she prepared to take the shot, a sudden wind shift threatened to push her bullet off target. Maria made rapid calculations, adjusted her aim point, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure she had practiced thousands of times. The shot was perfect, striking the target directly in the center mass area. The exercise controller's radio crackled to life. "Target neutralized. Exercise complete." That evening, Master Gunnery Sergeant Hayes approached Maria during chow time. "That was exceptional work out there, Rodriguez. You adapted to changing conditions and made a difficult shot under pressure." That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in combat situations. The praise felt good, but Maria had learned not to let success go to her head. Each exercise brought new challenges, and the standards continued to rise as the course progressed. The instructors introduced night shooting, urban environments, and scenarios where students had to engage multiple targets in rapid succession while maintaining accuracy. Maria's reputation among her fellow students grew, as her performance consistently ranked at the top of the class. Corporal Tommy Chen, a quiet Marine from California who had become one of her closest friends in the program, often sought her advice on technique and mental preparation. "How do you stay so calm during the exercises?" he asked one evening as they cleaned their rifles in the barracks. "Yesterday, when we had to take those shots with the instructors yelling at us, you looked like you were at a Sunday picnic." Maria thought about his question carefully.
"I think about why I'm here,"
she finally answered. "Every shot I take in training might be the difference between completing a mission and letting down my fellow Marines in combat. That makes all the stress here seem manageable." The final phase of training included advanced techniques that separated scout snipers from ordinary marksmen. Maria learned about observation and reconnaissance, becoming skilled at gathering and reporting intelligence from concealed positions. She studied the art of camouflage until she could disappear into almost any environment, and she mastered the use of advanced optics and range-finding equipment. The culminating exercise was a week-long field problem that tested every skill the students had learned. Working in two-person teams, they had to infiltrate a mock enemy position, gather intelligence on troop movements and equipment, and eliminate designated high-value targets without being detected. Maria was paired with Corporal Chen, and together they planned their approach to the target area with the methodical precision of seasoned professionals. They studied satellite imagery, weather forecasts, and enemy patrol patterns before selecting their infiltration route and hide sites. The mission began at 0200 hours on a moonless Monday morning. Maria and Chen moved through the darkness like ghosts, covering several miles of rough terrain while carrying full combat loads. They established their primary observation post in a tree line overlooking the target compound, spending the next 4 days gathering detailed intelligence on the mock enemy force. On the 4th day, their targets finally appeared. 3 instructors playing the role of enemy commanders conducting a planning meeting in an open courtyard. The shot was approximately 800 yards through shifting wind conditions, and Maria had only a few seconds to engage before the targets moved to cover. Chen served as her spotter, calling wind conditions and confirming target identification through his binoculars. Wind left to right, approximately 5 miles per hour. Range 847 yards. Target verified. Maria made her calculations and settled behind her rifle, controlling her breathing as she had been taught. The crosshairs found the primary target's center mass, and she began the smooth trigger press that had become second nature through countless hours of practice. The shot broke clean, and through her scope, Maria watched the instructor react to the hit indicator on his equipment. "Target down," Chen whispered into their radio. "Outstanding work," came the reply from the exercise controller. "Mission complete." Graduation day arrived with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Of the original 43 Marines who had started the course, only 19 remained to receive their sniper qualification. Maria stood at attention as Master Gunnery Sergeant Hayes presented her with the distinctive sniper badge, a crossed rifle and telescope that marked her as one of the Marine Corps' elite marksmen. "You've earned the right to call yourself a scout sniper," Hayes told the graduating class. "But remember that this graduation is just the beginning. The real test comes when you deploy and put these skills to use in defense of your fellow Marines and your country." After the ceremony, Maria's parents and siblings were finally able to visit and see what their daughter had accomplished. Carlos looked at the transformed young woman before him with a mixture of pride and amazement. "I still don't fully understand what you do," he admitted as they walked around the base together. "But I can see that you've found your calling. You carry yourself differently now, like you know exactly who you are and what you're capable of." Isabella hugged her daughter tightly, whispering a prayer for her safety in Spanish. "Promise me you'll remember that you always have a home in Laredo, no matter where this life takes you." Maria promised, but she knew her path was leading far from the safety of home. Orders had already been cut for her first deployment, and within weeks she would be heading to Afghanistan as part of a special operations unit tasked with hunting high-value targets in one of the world's most dangerous regions. As her family prepared to return to Texas, Maria stood once again watching their departure. But this time, she wasn't the uncertain young woman who had left Laredo. She was a highly trained professional, equipped with skills that few people in the world possessed. The next chapter of her story would unfold in the mountains and deserts of Afghanistan, where her training would be tested against an enemy that had been fighting in those harsh conditions for generations. The war was waiting, and Maria Rodriguez was ready to answer its call. The Afghan mountains rose like ancient giants against the pre-dawn sky as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her position on the rocky outcrop. 6 months into her first deployment, she had learned to read these mountains like a familiar book, understanding how the wind moved through the valleys, how the temperature changes affected bullet trajectory, and how the enemy used the terrain to their advantage. The joint operation had been planned for weeks. Intelligence sources had identified a meeting between 3 of the region's most wanted enemy commanders, men whose networks had been responsible for dozens of attacks against coalition forces. General Khalil Hassan controlled supply routes from Pakistan. General Ahmed Nazir commanded insurgent training camps in the northern provinces, and General Farid Wardak coordinated bomb-making operations that had killed or maimed hundreds of soldiers. Lieutenant Commander Jake Mitchell, the SEAL team leader who had been hunting these targets for over a year, had initially been skeptical about working with a Marine sniper. His previous experiences with inter-service cooperation had been mixed, and he wasn't sure how a relatively new sniper would perform under the pressure of a high-stakes operation. Rodriguez comes highly recommended, Colonel Patricia Hendricks had explained during the mission briefing. She's got the highest accuracy scores we've seen from a first deployment sniper, and her psychological evaluations show exceptional stress management capabilities. The operation began 3 days earlier when the team inserted via helicopter into a remote landing zone 15 kilometers from the target compound. Maria and the 12-man SEAL team moved through the night, carrying equipment and supplies for an extended observation mission. The terrain was brutal, loose shale that could cause a devastating fall, narrow paths along cliff faces, and the constant threat of enemy patrols. On the second day, they established their observation post on a ridge overlooking the target valley. Through high-powered telescopes, they confirmed intelligence reports about the compound's layout and security measures. Maria spent hours studying the building where the meeting was scheduled to take place, calculating ranges to various positions and identifying potential shooting lanes. The waiting was the hardest part. Maria had learned during training that combat was often 99% boredom punctuated by moments of intense action, but experiencing it in a real combat zone was different. Every sound could signal approaching danger. Every movement in the valley below had to be evaluated and catalogued. On the morning of the third day, everything changed. The radio crackled with updates from intelligence sources. All 3 targets had arrived at the compound and were scheduled to meet within the hour. Maria and Lieutenant Commander Mitchell moved to their final firing position, a carefully selected spot that offered clear lines of sight to the target building. The distance to the target was measured precisely at 1847 meters, over a mile of thin mountain air between Maria's rifle and her targets. At that range, dozens of variables could affect the bullet's path. Wind speed and direction, air density changes due to altitude, the rotation of the Earth, even the temperature of the ammunition. Maria methodically worked through her calculations, referencing data cards she had prepared during their observation period. The morning wind patterns were consistent with what she had observed over the previous days, but mountain weather was notoriously unpredictable. A sudden gust at the wrong moment could push her bullet several feet off target. Through her high-powered scope, Maria watched the compound courtyard where intelligence indicated the meeting would take place. At 0947 hours, 3 figures emerged from the main building and began walking toward a smaller structure on the opposite side of the courtyard. Even at nearly 2 kilometers distance, Maria recognized the distinctive clothing and movement patterns that matched the intelligence photographs she had studied. Visual confirmation on all 3 targets. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell whispered, his binoculars tracking the same scene. They're moving toward the secondary building. Maria's training took over as she began the mental checklist that had been drilled into her during countless hours at Quantico. Range confirmed at 1847 meters. Wind reading showed a left-to-right crosswind at approximately 8 miles per hour at their position, but the wind in the target area could be different due to the valley's unique topography. The targets were moving slowly, apparently engaged in conversation as they crossed the open courtyard. Maria estimated she had perhaps 30 to 45 seconds before they reached the cover of the secondary building, where they would be invisible until the meeting ended and they departed the compound. Rodriguez, that's an impossible shot, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell said, his voice tight with the stress of watching 2 years of planning potentially slip away. The range, the wind conditions, moving targets, we should call for air support and try to catch them when they leave. But Maria had been preparing for this moment since the day she first picked up a rifle at Paris Island. Every hour of training, every practice shot, every lesson in patience and precision had been leading to this single opportunity. She could feel the familiar calm settling over her as her body automatically assumed the shooting position she had practiced thousands of times. The first target, General Hassan, paused in the center of the courtyard to light a cigarette. The brief pause provided the stationary target Maria needed, but it also meant she had to act immediately before the group continued moving. Maria's breathing slowed to the measured rhythm she had learned during sniper school. Her finger found the trigger, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack without disturbing her sight picture. The crosshairs settled on Hassan's center mass, and Maria made her final wind compensation based on the movement of dust in the courtyard below. The shot broke with the clean surprise she had been taught, the rifle's recoil driving straight back into her shoulder as she maintained her sight picture. Through the scope, Maria watched the bullet's trace as it arced across the valley, covering nearly 2 kilometers in less than 3 seconds. General Hassan dropped instantly, his body collapsing in the center of the courtyard. The other 2 targets froze for a critical moment, trying to understand what had happened to their companion. That moment of confusion gave Maria the time she needed for a second shot. General Nazir was already turning toward cover when Maria's second bullet found him, the impact spinning him around before he fell beside the compound's main building. The third target, General Wardak, began running toward the nearest doorway, but Maria's third shot caught him before he could reach safety. 3 shots, 3 targets, 47 seconds from first to last engagement. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell stared through his binoculars in stunned silence before keying his radio to report mission success to headquarters. "All 3 targets neutralized," he transmitted, his voice carrying a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal amazement. "Sniper, that was the most incredible shooting I've ever witnessed." But Maria was already focused on their extraction plan. Taking the shots had been only half the mission. Now they needed to leave the area before enemy reinforcements arrived. Within minutes, they heard the distinctive sound of vehicles racing toward the compound from multiple directions. The team moved quickly along their planned escape route, covering several kilometers of mountain terrain before reaching their extraction point. The helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, and soon they were airborne and heading back to base. During the flight, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell finally had a chance to process what he had witnessed. "Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. When they told me I'd be working with a Marine sniper on our first deployment, I had my doubts. For what you did back there, that was legendary." The debriefing at base camp confirmed the mission's complete success. Intelligence sources reported that all 3 targets had been killed, delivering a devastating blow to enemy operations throughout the region. The precision and timing of the shots had convinced enemy forces that they were facing a much larger attack, leading to confusion and defensive measures that further disrupted their activities. Colonel Hendricks personally conducted Maria's after-action interview, asking detailed questions about her decision-making process and the technical aspects of the shots. "Rodriguez, in 30 years of military service, I've never seen shooting like that. You've set a new standard for what's possible in combat sniper operations." But for Maria, the mission's success was measured in different terms. 3 enemy commanders who had been responsible for countless attacks against coalition forces would never again threaten her fellow service members. The training and sacrifice that had brought her to Afghanistan had been justified by this single operation. News of the mission spread quickly through special operations channels. Within days, Maria found herself being visited by senior officers who wanted to understand how such an extraordinary shot had been accomplished. The technical aspects were analyzed and incorporated into training programs, but the human elements, the years of dedication, the mental preparation, the moment of calm certainty, could not be easily replicated. Letters from home carried a new tone of pride and understanding. Carlos wrote that he finally comprehended why his daughter had chosen military service, and Isabella included prayers of gratitude along with her usual expressions of concern for Maria's safety. The mission that had started with Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's doubt about working with a new Marine sniper became the foundation for one of the most effective hunter-killer teams in theater. Over the remaining months of her deployment, Maria would participate in dozens of operations, but none would match the perfect convergence of skill, opportunity, and necessity that had defined that morning in the Afghan mountains. When Maria returned to the United States months later, she carried with her not just commendations and medals, but the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the ultimate test of her profession and emerged victorious. The girl from Laredo, who had dreamed of making a difference, had become a warrior whose actions would be studied and remembered long after the war in Afghanistan ended. Standing once again on American soil, Maria thought about the journey that had brought her from a small border town to the mountains of Afghanistan. Every challenge had been preparation for that moment when 3 enemy generals stood in an open courtyard, unaware that a young woman from Texas was watching them through a scope from nearly 2 miles away. The shot that no one could make had been made, and Maria Rodriguez had proven that with enough dedication, training, and courage, even the impossible could become reality. Her story would inspire a new generation of Marines to push beyond their perceived limitations and discover what they were truly capable of achieving. But for Maria, the most important victory was knowing that her fellow service members would come home safely, Because 3 of their most dangerous enemies would never again threaten American lives. That knowledge made every sacrifice, every hardship, and every moment of doubt worthwhile. The warrior had come home, but her legend would live on in the mountains, where courage and precision had combined to change the course of a war, one perfectly placed shot at a time.